Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Oh, yeah. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Hello, hello, hello. I like attention, so please, right? I do like attention. Good morning, everyone, and it's good to be here. And I must say, it's been a very fantastic 3 days so far. I will just take a leap from what Bernie said earlier. I don't actually want to go back, but I think my colleague is here and she might report me to the boss. So I will go back. Good morning. My name is Godwyns Onwuchekwa. I'm from eLife. I'm the head of communities at eLife. So my job revolves around talking to people. And for those who have spoken to me, I do like talking to people, right? But also, I like engaging with people. So for this session, we are going to do a little bit of DIY system. So let me start by shocking you and saying, could you do me a favor, only if you can, raise your right hand up as high as you can, as high as you can. Don't pull anything, just raise it up. And now bring it down. Raise your left hand up, just the same way, just the same way. All right, you can bring it down. The significance of this is that we are going to have an interactive session. So I don't want you to be raising your hand up and asking questions. There's no problem with that. But anyway, I want to remind you of something today, that today is also World Youth Mental Health Day. Just a notice that, sometimes when we talk about mental health, people get a little bit cringy. But I think the increase in the discussion around mental health has led to improved well-being in so many places, but also it has reduced the stigma, but stigma still persists. For I know that there are parents here, uncles, gunkles, I'm a gunkle, aunties, and grandparents and all whatnot, but we have a youth in our life. Be mindful of how we interact with them. Now, to the business of the day. We are talking about building equity in OA. I think very fittingly on Monday, we opened with a question that says, who cares about equity? And the sad part of that is that they've stolen all my notes. So we might actually end up today just having a chat. But I'm going to ask that question to the room. And I know the answer, but be brave to not accept it. So who cares about equity here? Let me see. Wow. I mean, the business is done, right? We can go. But no, it's a conversation that needs to be continuous. In community engagement, we have something we call continuum, the continuum, community engagement continuum. So it never really ends. It goes round and round, and as we discover new things, we go into the next phase. On Monday, we covered things like who cares about equity, who has access to information, and what format are those information? How understandable are they? Those are very key and pertinent issues that we need to take into consideration. Equity is the core of what I do. So if you see me get a little bit animated, don't worry. I have very fantastic four experts here who are going to talk in particular aspects of their work. But as I said, it's something that revolves around all of us here have something to offer. In community engagement, we use a theory that says asset-based management, asset-based community development. And the simple summary about that is that everyone brings something to the table. And this is where equity becomes important. I'm going to tell you that in the discussion we've been having, I hear a lot about inclusion. But I don't think inclusion alone cuts it. We need to go further. And that next step is called involvement. It is different from inclusion. Now, as you all are sitting here, sorry, I touched my glasses a lot because I'm 2 months into wearing glasses, so it's a little bit disoriented. But, as you all are here now, listening to me, you're included, right? You're not talking. We might as well have this chat here, and you just listen. That is inclusion. When we move to the next level, which is called involvement, it means there will be a connection. Your voice matters, what you say takes part in the discussion. That's what I want us to do today. But also, that's where I want us to start focusing, because most of the time, equity is a tick box exercise. Most of the time, equality is a tick box exercise. Most of the time, diversity is a tick box exercise. So we need to change that. We cannot change it by, having an endless discussion. We have to take some practical steps, translating policies into practices and making sure that strategies we take are considerate of those who are supposed to be part of the discussion. And I'm going to be asking our panel today to let me know, or what they think about, one of the key questions I always ask is, whose voice is missing? It's unfortunate that the hen has left. She said that I shouldn't say I was a former. I'm a patients advocate. I worked in public health before I came to this crazy industry 3.5 years ago. So in public health, we do a lot of involvement. So whose voice is missing? Most of the times we look at the table and it's only one type of people. It's only the same people from the same university. It's only the same people from the same country, from the same region, but they are saying, we want to make things better. Now, making things better is only when the voices of those who are concerned, who live the life, who has the lived experience, are on the table and saying, this is how it feels to me. This is what I see when I'm looking here. This is how it works in my place. And if in our various organizations we are not doing that, then we are missing the mark. We're not going to change anything. No matter how well-intentioned we are, it's not going to change. And I can tell you what I love being here is I talk to so many people. I learn something new. Every day I talk to someone and they're, wow, is that what it was? You learn something, because life experiences impacts in how we see things. It changes our views. So today is about involvement rather than just equity. We are looking at the tools and the frameworks and people. And thank you to those who formulate this title, because once I saw people in it, I was impressed. I was like, okay, we can do this. So I have these fantastic people, and they're going to tell you about the work they've done to contribute to the work about equity. The aspects I'm looking at is not just equity in OA. It's really equity into, because I don't feel, and I might be wrong because I'm only, I like using this card, that I'm only 3.5 years in this industry. So maybe there's something I haven't seen yet, encountered, experienced, but I don't feel that equity is actually working or is being done. I'm sorry if I'm being too critical, but that is the way I see it. And as young as I look, I'm quite old. You just need to ask me, what do you do? But I've worked in the sphere of diversity and equity and inclusion or involvement for over 20 years now. And that has been in all manner of communities. Before I came here, it's been in social community, it's been in health, it's been in LGBT activities, and it's been in mental health, homelessness. So I covered most of the bases. And I can tell you that equity is the key. But equity is not just about fairness. You see, as short as I am standing here, you can all see me. Who was that tall person I was talking to earlier? Can't remember. If they come here now and they stand here where I stand, they will still see better than I can, right? That's what Joy was trying to explain on Monday. And that is what equity is. If they come here, they should stand there and they be like this. We have the same view. But if it's equality, they will come and stand here the same place I stand. So remember that when you do equity, it's about providing what serves the needs of a particular group of people, not what everyone needs, because what everyone needs is not the same. So I will ask our first panelist to introduce themselves, Lorraine. And one thing, I do not introduce people. I ask you to introduce themselves because I don't know her.
Are we doing the introductions and then going up there? Or?
So you can do it from here. You can do it from here.
I'll do it over there.
Go for it.
I'll do it over there. Right, good morning, everybody. My name is Lorraine Estelle, and I'm from Information Power. And I'm going to talk to you this morning about a project we have just completed, the pricing framework. This is a pricing framework for differential pricing. And I must say that Coalition S sponsored the work that we've done, so thank you, Coalition S. And this project is about pricing for countries all over the world. And price, in many places, is a huge, insurmountable problem. And we all know that what is affordable in a wealthy country is less affordable or not affordable at all in other countries in the world. Some of you may have heard of the Big Mac Index. This is rather a simplistic thing, but it gives you a flavor, if you like, of that issue. So if you fancy for your lunch a Big Mac, do not go to Switzerland. It will cost you $8 US. If you take a different route to Brazil, you will pay $4.23 for the same Big Mac. Go a little bit further to India, and you will be paying $2.85. So we know that different countries can afford different things. So how are we going to get a framework that you publishers can use to develop differential pricing? We knew that we needed to use a data set, an open data set, and we took the World Bank GDP data set. And using that data, we gave every country, 200 countries, a data point based on their wealth. And we have also produced a tool, which you can download and use, to model differential prices for those 200 countries. Now, I can hear you all thinking, 200 prices, that's not possible. It's not really feasible. So in the framework, we recommend that publishers develop bands. We give an example of 4 bands where you group countries together according to their wealth. But you can adapt that, you can make it more granular, and the tool will enable you to model that. So that, very briefly, is what we have created. I want to just tell you a couple of things that I've already heard about this project. One is, many of you will already have in place waivers, for APCs. Because we have a data point for pricing for every country, doesn't mean we're saying you have to charge every country. Carry on with your waivers. On your framework, they will be priced to 0. A lot of other publishers said to me, well, I don't really know why you're doing this. You know, we already give discounts in places. And then when I delved down a bit and I started talking to them and asked them, how did you decide which countries you would give the discounts to? How did you decide how much discount you would give people in those countries? And they sort of said, oh, well, I'm not really sure. It's sort of a legacy thing. And very often, those discounts would have been perhaps in response to the strength of a negotiator in a particular country, a personal relationship. But they were fingers in the air. So this framework gives you an opportunity to develop differential prices based on open data. So what are you going to do with the framework? Well, I would suggest you take it and start a discussion. The first discussion you would have will be internally. How can we implement a framework that is transparent, that really helps us price in a way that makes our scholarly communications available to countries across the world? And when I say scholarly communications, I'm talking about anything you sell to a customer, a subscription, a read and publish agreement, an APC. So it's a real opportunity to use the data, to use the tool we've had, to have that conversation internally. And then take it out. take it out to your customers, to your communities around the world, and use it as a starting point for a conversation about pricing that will work. And you're not rocking up your finger in the air, just making up the first price that sort of sounds vaguely agreeable. Your starting point will be a data-driven, informed starting point that will be the beginning of that conversation. I don't know how many minutes I've got left. Can I, one more thing? One other thing I just want to touch on, because it really hit me hard, was on Monday, Morris said, when we get around the negotiating table, our principles go out of the door. I've been around a lot of negotiating tables, and I've always hung on to my principles. And that's why in the framework, we have the principles for differentiated pricing so that it fosters equity. And you'll find those principles on the poster. So I would encourage you to read them, adopt them, and take those principles with you into those discussions when you're talking about fairer pricing for the global community. So the free tool and the framework you can get to through the QR code, which is here, and also, of course, on the poster downstairs. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. And what I noticed this time, I've been coming to OASPA conferences for about 30 years or something, is that it really feels like the baton's passed on from these old blokes like me to a new generation of young, informed and dynamic people. So I'm really grateful to be here and talk to you. So I'm Robert Kiley. I'm from Coalition S, a gang of research funders, but I'm here today representing a working group, the what do we call it? Beyond Article-Based Charges Working Group, which is a group of funders, librarians and publishers trying to work together on equitable issues. And what I really want to do today is announce the launch of a new online tool called How Equitable Is It? We're shamelessly plagiarizing the How Open Is It? Developed by PLOS and Spark and others back in the day. And this is a framework, an online tool by which you can start to assess publisher business models, sorry, Rebecca, arrangements on the axis of equity. I should start by saying, when we first got the working group together, we had this sort of notion we'd try and define a business model which was equitable. And though we could all pretty much easily agree that, authors shouldn't pay and readers shouldn't pay, beyond that, it got a bit difficult. Was, for example, rights retention, is that more important than price transparency? Well, they're both important. So how do you do this? So we pivoted somewhat and have developed this tool, How Equitable Is It? And what the user does is, through a series of 7 criteria, 7 questions, you're asked to consider to what extent the model you are assessing, is it sort of somewhat equitable, somewhat inequitable, or somewhat or very equitable. So a model of 1, 3, 5 type scoring system. And the idea is that you complete this framework, you complete the score, and then you understand to what extent the model you're assessing inhibits or supports equitable sharing of knowledge. And I think it can be used both by librarians, those who buy services, to inform investment decisions, but it can also be used by those who provide services, like publishers, to see where their model scores highly and where their model doesn't score so well. So an opportunity for them to sort of develop models which are more equitable. So the objectives behind this tool really were to provide the community with something practical. We talk a lot about equity, and we wanted, is there something practical we can just sort of do to try and assess something? Present the information in a way which would enable you to do comparisons. So, I know it's life's a lot more complicated. But in theory, if you had two models on the table and you could only fund one of them, and equity was one of your core principles, then in theory, you could use this tool to say, I'm going to put my money there and not there. So it can help make those decisions. And I think it's the third objective is really to try and help stakeholders think about how they can move away from APCs. So some of the key attributes of this thing is that it doesn't try to prescribe a solution. You are the ones assessing the model in front of you. It is completely publisher model agnostic. Doesn't say what's good or bad. And it can be used by all stakeholders. And though I think there's still more work to do, we think it can be used, say, as an educational tool. We're launching it today we're deliberately framing it as a beta one. Despite having this fantastic working group, we recognize we probably haven't got it right. So we're launching it today. There's a QR code somewhere on this slide, and it's on the poster upstairs. Go to our website, run the tool, and tell us what you think. There's a feedback form where the feedback is open till the end of October, and the ambition of the working group is that we will publish a revised version which tries to address some of the comments we've received early in 2025. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Happy to be here, happy to see you. I'm Malavika from OASPA, in case I haven't had the chance to meet you yet. And in terms of introducing myself, I thought about what the best way to do it is, to say what it is that I do for OASPA. And then I thought I'd start with Claire's words, right? She opened the conference by saying, OASPA is a place focused on coming far together, working on how to make open access happen. And then if we extend to the next layer of that, that's where I come in to assist a little bit around that making open access happen, where we're not talking just about more open access, but how do we do it better? And that's the element that I'm focusing on in my work. But of course, it's not my opinion that counts here. Who decides what better looks like, right? That's an important question. And my answer to that would be you do. You in this room and you, the wider open access community across all regions in all disciplines, right? So my role is also about listening to that, and then trying to help on that journey towards making open access better. So coming to the work of my, summarized in the poster here, OASPA believes that a successful transition to open access is one where all can read and all can publish open access, right? And towards that end, we are developing some recommended practices, not least because as part of this process, we were also asked to develop some recommended practices. And we're framing these as reducing inequities. They're actually damage limitations. We're talking about equity and equity and equity. There is inequity, right? So let's address that head on. And so we're developing some practices. This is a process and it is not finished work, but we have arrived at 4 headline goals to face all stakeholders, to face publishing organizations. And very quickly, if I tell you about those headline goals, Lorraine said in the opening panel, I would beg somebody for the article. And if you listened, she said it twice in 2 different places. She actually used the word beg. She's a CEO and she runs things and she's amazing and she is begging for access, right? Legge said that the shift from the paywall to read to the paywall to publish was catastrophic. It was a betrayal. We have a problem with read and we have a problem with access, okay? So our first goal is quite simply about enabling open access for all scholars. And we suggest part of this is to make sure that the word open access, words matter, right? The word open access is not synonymous with a per publication charge. Coming to the second goal, Maurice talked about publisher library negotiations, and he said, we first have to agree that we are having a new conversation, right? Christina said in the Show Me the Money panel, she said, transitioning to open is not cost or effort neutral. It's an investment in the future. This second goal is still facing all stakeholders, okay? It's publishers and payers, and it's everybody. And it is about evolving how we approach pricing. Lorraine talked a little bit about that already, but also purchasing and funding practices, and on what terms we converse even, okay? So that is the second goal. Thirdly, we've heard the word workaround a couple of times in that opening panel. It was used by both Lorraine and Joy. And I realized that this word is actually quite a polite way of saying, I used an unpleasant route of extra hardship to get to where I am, okay? I mean, begging for a paper was Lorraine, and Joy said it's not about giving us free things. My suggestion is that waivers are a workaround. And in my work and through this process, right, I've heard waivers being called demeaning, hand-me-downs, and even worse. And we had a great talk at the end of yesterday where Blessing and Rodri were talking to us about increasing the opportunity to choose and deliver open access, enabled through waivers, enabled through transformative agreements. And yes, that's great, right? More OA is great. We're OASPA, we love that, okay? But the goal here, which is facing, now it's the third one down, it's facing publishing organizations specifically. The goal here is getting at improving this process and reducing barriers and burdens. And then finally, the fourth goal, Noni talked to us about the fact that her supply chain expert, Noni, she says, I should trust the person upstream, right, in the supply chain. I should trust that everyone gets a fair share of the reward. Judith talked about the broken contract between academics and traditional routes of publishing. This goal, this fourth goal, is what we're saying here is understanding how OA is sustained and what underpins pricing will help payers and it will help researchers make informed choices. This is about fostering that trust that is needed to support the new forms of OA, those models that we perhaps have not arrived at yet, or the experimental ones that are decoupled from per publication charges. We need trust in the system, and that's what this fourth goal is about. My time is up, and I will only say this work so far is a summary and narrow. Equity is huge. Mostly the focus here is economic. And I ask you to excuse me for that because I've just not got there yet. It's a big subject, right? But I thank everyone that has given me input. I know some of you are in this room. Thank you. You are my teachers, and I'm still developing this work. Come talk to me if you want more specifics.
Just making it difficult. Right. My name is Omo Oaiya, and I'm not from this community. But I was when Godwyn asked, who cares about equity, everybody's hand went up. So I was wondering, who doesn't care then? So why do we still have a problem? So my background is National Research Education Networks. I work for WACREN. WACREN is a Western Central African network. I'll talk about this, but before that, I just wanted to give you a sense of my what access means to me. So about 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have enough connectivity in Africa. We had access problems. We couldn't access most things because they were got on the internet. So we started to build networks to improve our access. So today we have 38 NRENs in Africa. There are 55 countries. We've established 38 NRENs in 38 countries. We have connected 22 of them. Things have improved. We have cloud infrastructure that we have deployed for different applications. And somewhere in that journey, we came across this problem about 6, 7 years ago, because we were trying to support researchers, and then these issues that we were unaware of before then came up. So at that point, we thought open access meant open access. We had no ideas of the colors, green, gold. We learned about that later. Still doesn't make sense. So we, as it is, you learn new things, we learn the buzzwords, we repeat them. Then at some point we're saying, no, this is not going to work. So we're not interested in most of the conversation as Enrons. We think we need to, Devika talked about disrupting. For us, it's just survival. We want to build our infrastructure. We want our researchers to have things to use. We want our researchers to publish in infrastructures where they're not second-class citizens. We want to stimulate the environment. So that's what we are doing. So this is part of what we are doing. So it was just, I'll backtrack a little bit. So as part of that whole endeavor, we started this initiative called LipSense. Met Legge at the beginning of that, met some other folks here in the room. So LipSense is trying to drive open science, strengthen open science in Africa. We're doing that in different ways. We are talking to university leadership. That's a big problem there. We are trying to change mindsets. We are talking to the librarians and the researchers, building capacity, and we're creating infrastructure. So IFU, I'm sure IFU has been mentioned there a couple of times. IFU is a long-time partner. They were part of that initiative from the beginning. So was COA, the Confederation of Open Access Repositories, because at the time, we thought repositories were the problem. We didn't have enough of them. Then we realized that publishing was another issue. But in any case, long story short, although it says Diamond Open Access there, that's because the proposal was written with that term. We like to call it no-fee publishing, and that's how we think about it. So this project started in November 2023. I'm sure you all know Angel. Angel is probably part of this community. I hope to become part of the community, by the way. So it started in November 2023. Some few ambitious intentions. One was we wanted to understand what was there, what wasn't there. So we ran a continent-wide landscape study. It's all on the board. 199 journals that we got responses from. We know there are many more. It was very difficult getting information from Nigeria. I'm Nigerian, by the way, because it's large, it's a little bit dysfunctional, and it was hard to get info. But we still got 199 journals responding, 21 platforms, and ended up with 25 country reports. Now, those reports are published on the IFU website. It tells you about, what the current state is. We have part of the funding was to offer funding to these publishers to sort of support them with Diamond Open Access. So so Angel is doing a lot of work in the project. As you can see, we intend to form a no-fee publishing community of practice. That isn't going to happen this year. In terms of the platforms and services, there's Angel, which you're familiar with, but in WACREN and Ubuntu Alliance, because there are 3 regional research networks, we are also sort of standing up infrastructure to support publishing and repositories. So it's all there, really. There isn't, my time's almost run up. So the idea is to provide infrastructure, stimulate early career researchers, get leadership to sort of start to think about reform, especially with the assessment. And we need to talk later about this, but I wanted to give another example of how this is, there is no, from the Enrons point of view, this conversation for us, we would rely on Reggie, Susan to drive while we just build infrastructure. Because when we think about the equity, it is at so many levels. Let me give you an example. Persistent identifiers. Everybody talks about DOIs and assumes that we should have DOIs. DOIs are good. If you build infrastructure, you need identifiers to make the building services on top of the infrastructure. But we can't afford DOIs. So it makes no sense to us to persist with the argument. So we're looking for alternatives. So I was in the Welcome Trust Make Data Count meeting a couple of weeks ago in London. And the conversation was that we're going to create a fractured environment. So we might have, because Africa and Latin America coming around together around us, that would have a two-tier system. And my response was, that's already was there. It's already a two-tier system. So if it becomes a two-tier system where we have systems, then I think we have done very well. Thank you.
Thank you to the panelists for their contributions. As you might have noticed, that this what we did is have very short introductions. This is part of the plan for this to be an interactive session. So what I'm going to let you know that you can ask questions at any point, but I will make you a promise that it might not be answered, right? And also I will tell you that if you raise your hand, you might not be called straight away, but I will encourage you as the discussion go on to feel free to raise your hand and introduce something. Let's make it very, very fun, okay? You don't seem convinced. Please be, please. There's a hand up there already. Ooh, this is working. Show me the money. Show me the money. Let's do that, and I'll come to my panelist. Well, you sound like you don't need one.
I have a question for Malavika, and by the way, thank you all for an amazing panel, really inspiring. As people might know me, I am an operations and execution person. So my question to Malavika is, with the recommended practice from OASPA, how really are you envisioning this to be turned into action and change?
It's a great. Can you repeat the question back so everyone?
She's asking you.
Yeah.
Oh, me to repeat.
No, she can ask the question again.
Oh,
All right.
sorry. I was waiting here. Okay, so Ivana asked, with the recommended practices, how does OASPA expect this to actually be implemented and drive change? Yes? Great. Okay, we're figuring that out, right? But we do have many members and many supporters and folk here who are connected with OASPA, and we would like to hear from you, your ideas about doing this. We do report every year on the outputs of a lot of data collection that we work on. So every year, OASPA puts out a post about the OA publishing activity of its membership. And there are some things that potentially we can objectively measure, right? We can't measure things like intention, and that's a challenge, but there are some things we can measure. So we are going to puzzle out what are those things we can actually count, that we can wrap into the reporting and be able to celebrate those who are taking these steps. And I will also say, Ivana, not everything that we have in the recommendations, and there's more detail, right, than what I've presented in 5 minutes. Not everything of that is new or novel. There are those already doing it, right? Let's not, I don't want to say we're streets ahead of everybody else. No, there are many streets ahead of us, perhaps, and we are saying these things, and you might look at what we're saying and go, oh, it's already met. So we're also talking about a checklist and being able to report against that. But we're in very early days, and if you have ideas, go for it.
Thank you. So,
Sorry, she gave me an idea. She say some things
this is
really
this train has run away. So,
would it be an idea to capture really, really short and concise, case studies of examples of how people have done things?
Yes.
And to share that rather than long reports or wait for once a year, actually.
Yeah.
To share that.
Yeah,
Would be great.
That's a great idea. And I was going to talk in response to maybe another question about OASPA's Wayfinder series, but that's the other side of the coin, right? Where we're demonstrating some examples of good practice. And so that's on the map. But your idea of really short, because those are conversations, those are webinars. So yeah, short and snappy. That is not my strong point, so I need to work on it.
So thank you. Now I will start with some questions to have this conversation with these guys, and then of course it's already begun. So thank you for doing that. I'm going to start with the issue of pricing, and ask, do we believe that we can achieve this through pricing? Because there's always this discussion about, oh well, LMICs, we can maybe reduce their price or we can charge them less. But as Omo finished talking about two-tier system, would it turn to a situation where some are paying, some are not paying? How does that work? In some discussion I've had with other people, I moved to the UK 20 years ago as a student, and one of the experiences I had was being a foreign student who is not eligible for student loans, but also who is now back in Nigeria, considered as being in the West. So how would this pricing work and be dynamic to include everyone and provide a level playing field?
That's a really good question. And we're not saying pricing, is the answer to everything. It is just an element. But it is a really important element. And we've been talking about access to content being very important around the world, and the ability to publish. And while we still have these models that require an exchange of money in order to read or to publish, there is a price. And it's really important that that pricing takes account of ability to pay. On Monday, you might remember, Heather showed a map of the world in the context of purchasing price parity. And she was showing on that, the very wealthy countries, the countries that are have the least wealth, and then a very large range of middle countries, I suppose, in terms of wealth. And one of the things I think that we tend to focus on is those two ends. So when it comes to pricing. And as I say, there are great initiatives around and schemes, Research for Life, I4, making access possible where countries can't afford a price. And again, I4 negotiating waivers for people in countries that would never be able to afford an APC. But in the middle, there is a vast range of countries that are excluded from scholarly communications, from full participation, because they cannot afford the prices. And it is really important, it's essential that while we have models that require this exchange of money, that we look at pricing in a fair way. And when I say fair, I mean fair. I don't mean rocking up and, oh, go on, I'll give you 10% off. That isn't fair. And it's not helpful. Really using the data that is there to inform that discussion, to make sure where prices are applied, that they are done it in a way that makes participation as possible as it can be. So, have I answered the question?
Yeah. You've done us. Yeah, that's very good. Does anyone else want to chip in here?
May I?
Yeah.
Just a few things to add about pricing. I think absolutely, Lorraine, data-driven, needs-based, differentiated pricing can help. And that's, part of what OASPA's recommendation also says. It's not necessarily only about geographies. You can have type of institution, right? You can have discipline. You can have format. There are different also ways. So it's really about considering what it is that's on offer and what's appropriate. And I think it's hard stuff, right? Pricing takes up a long time, but it's almost like go back to the drawing board. Go back to the drawing board with your prices. How and why are you setting them? And then build up from there rather than, trying to fiddle with what already exists. The other view, and, OASPA received a lot of input on our work, a lot. Another view, something I heard, was the very notion of pricing. The very notion that there is pricing at all is flawed, right? So consider that as well. There's lots here. This is a broad thing.
If I may just respond to one thing Malavika said, and that's about the types of institutions. And yes, the framework operates at a country level because, it's impossible to get a data set that went deeper. And that's another reason why I said the framework is the starting point for a conversation. Because, of course, in any one country, there will be disparity. There will be wealthier institutions and poorer institutions. So it's not intended to be a one price, for everybody or every institution in a country. Obviously, there are nuances, but it gives you that transparent, data-led starting point for the discussion.
Thank you. Yes.
I was going to add just one thing. I think we all have to recognise, obviously, there are clear costs in publishing. That is not a cost-free endeavour. So I think what we're really the trick, I think, is trying to look for models which spread those costs in the most equitable way possible. And I think, I hope, that the tool we're launching today might just help nudge people to start thinking about, okay, well, that model is inequitable, but that one is less inequitable, as it were. So I think we've got to fess up. It's not a free thing. We've got to pay. Someone's got to pay, but we need to spread those costs in an equitable way.
Thank you. Do you want to say something about that?
About pricing?
Of course.
What's there to say? Yes, I agree, there's cost. So some of that project that we have is determining some of those costs and models that are sustainable. Frequently when we talk about pricing, you have to remember, from my perspective, that's in foreign currency. I live in an environment where that fluctuates. So even if I made arrangements or allowances for that at the beginning of the year, it doesn't necessarily mean that my budgets will be the same halfway through the year. I can tell you countries where the rate has just sort of gone up by over 1,000%. It is just impossible in a low-resourced environment that has that for you to found a sustainable strategy. So
I'm glad you mentioned the currency, and in the research we did for the project, we talked to people in a lot of countries, and this is a real problem. And I was talking to one country, they had agreed their subscription price with the publisher, but by the time they came to pay, their currency dived, and that was a real problem. In the framework, I didn't really address it because it's so complicated, you need to read it. In the framework document, we talk about this very problem of currencies, particularly those countries where currency isn't very stable. And we talk about a risk-sharing mechanism that publishers can adopt to help in that situation. So it does involve some risk, obviously, it's a risk sharing, but we have to be mindful that this currency problem is a real barrier, a significant barrier in so many places in the world, and one that we really have to, help to address. It can't be putting all the risk onto the country that would be paying.
Okay, I know that pricing is important, money is important. And if we don't move away from it, we'll be stuck. So I think the robot showed us how equitable is it. And there were 7 criteria. So I'm beginning to wonder if if they have the same level of equity, would they provide the same level of equity for the 2 major regions? Well, we'll talk about the Western countries and global South, global North and South. Would it be applicable in the same way to both?
Short answer is I certainly hope so. And part of the reason we've done it as a beta launch is we can get feedback, and perhaps that question can be answered in a negative. No, it doesn't apply. But it is just like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, equity is a bit like that. So by providing this tool with a set of criteria, for each criteria we define why that's important to equity. and then we articulate what a most equitable model looks like, what a somewhat equitable model looks like, and obviously what a least equitable model looks like. So I think it would, just as it's sort of publisher model agnostic, I think it's fairly geographic agnostic as well. But use it, provide feedback, and the working group will consider how we can make it better.
Thank you. You're looking at me as if you have something to say.
No.
Right. Say something, man.
Well, one thing I was just thinking of as the discussion was playing out was publishers, we were talking about pricing, and that sounds like we're talking only about publishers doing a load of work. But it comes back to that goal number 2 of ours, right? Which is it's facing all stakeholders. Publishers can't do this alone. It needs investment in those new ways of doing things from payers of all types, right? So it's about that all stakeholder involvement. And then that leads into the trust issue, because you can't have payers saying, oh yes, I'll support this, without because there is a trust issue, right? So that's what I was asked during the work and in the feedback we received. Why is transparency in here? What does that got to do with equity, right? But if we want the investment, the payments to support the types of models that are much more equitable, then we need to heal that trust. This is not just publisher. These bits are not just publisher facing. It's all stakeholders.
Thank you. Does anyone have? There you go, Heather. Heather over there. While you get to Heather, I'm going to ask a question, which is also to the audience. As I said, we need to move on from money because it's important. But actually, when you think about equity, there's many other things involved. And I think we use the word open access. I will tell you that my first presentation in a conference like this 2 years ago, I was quite scared talking to people. What I said is that I found all this bunkers. I don't think equity exists. But my question then is that if we focus on money, we lose the other things that are very important. The participation I talked about, earlier representation, the voices that contribute, the principles that are set up. Now, this led me to ask this question. Heather, hold your gun, and you hold this, I'll come to you. The question is, when we make all these decisions, who is there who contributed to all of your work? And I'm holding you responsible for that, to say, tell me, whose voice was part of those work and how much value is those? Because sometimes I've experienced it. You're in a room just to say, hey, we have that black guy there. Yeah. And whatever you say doesn't count. Now, it is two-tier question. Who was involved in this piece of works that you did? How representative were they? I work with a lot of researchers. I run a program called Ambassadors. It's a global program with over 150 ambassadors, researchers from everywhere in the world. I make sure every region is part of it. Now, the point is, how are they taking part in what you do? Now, don't answer. Heather, thank you.
You're really putting us to the test this morning, Godwyns. I wrote down so I wouldn't forget the question. It's the last day and I did sleep well, but I want to get back to what you said, Godwyns, in the introduction, which you just also nicely teed up about involvement. And I think Malavika, in your third higher level highlight, you mentioned reducing barriers and burdens. And it's been touched upon, I think multiple times in the conference, the difference between disciplines. And most people know I'm a historian because I talk about it all the time. But the historians and the social scientists and the anthropologists during COVID, when their content was open, many of them for the first time, and they didn't even know what that meant, were astounded that the populations that they worked with, whether they were in the United States or around the world, could access that research freely. And I think it was a real light bulb moment, for some folks working in that space, and something that, I really applaud. And then one thing that really hasn't come up yet, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, is when the content is open, it can be used immediately in the teaching and learning process. And many folks in this room, we spend a lot of time generating content for teaching and learning. We spend a lot of time on projects at Delta Think that work in that space. But I think, sometimes that might be missed, and instructors do workarounds, extremely hard, burdensome things to try to get the thing they should have been doing anyway, as Malavika points out. But just, in terms of, opening involvement of local populations and local researchers, and also students, in that process, and the value that open brings to involve those populations.
Thank you. Now, have you all thought about your answer?
To Heather or to you?
Well, I mean, we can negotiate that. Do you have a quick answer to Heather?
I have a quick question for Heather. Is your question, Heather, about licensing?
I'm just going to put on my outdoor voice. I think it's about awareness in disciplines that are not familiar with OA at all. And I'm going to say I'm a historian married to an English professor, and the historians and the English professors will be the last ones to figure out the value, kind of having something open for them. So it's kind of an awareness, but also, the bringing together of different stakeholders with the resource. Once they have the awareness, as Omo mentioned, you can't automatically get it, just because it's online. So how do we connect these different stakeholder dots and actually scale some of the things we've seen happen, more broadly for the greater good? And I think, there's a lot of folks in this room who want to highlight activities that they are doing and, good news stories. And so if you just had any thoughts about, the getting away from pricing just for a second, the role that, OA plays in social return on investment, as mentioned yesterday, but particularly in teaching and learning and in involving research populations.
Okay, Heather, I'm just going to be a little bit disruptive and say,
I'm shocked.
Thank you. I know you will be. She won't admit me into her musicals anymore. God. But let's connect those two questions, because the key thing is connecting stakeholders. And my question was, who was represented? So you can then answer two questions, kill. Oh,
Shall I go first?
My panel. Does anyone has an answer?
Unless someone else
I thought you were talking to her.
Yeah.
Well, if you're
I was talking to the four of you. Let me start with Robert. Yeah. The two of you seem to have something going on there.
So, who was in the room?
Yes.
We convened we had an application process where people said we invited anyone to apply, but you had to demonstrate your interest and commitment to equity across the three stakeholders: publishers, librarians, consortia, funders. We picked a group. We tried to pick a geographic, diverse group as we can, and we've ended up with, obviously, inevitably, a lot of North American Europeans. We've also got representatives from China, from Latin America, and places. But I don't pretend that those 16 people or so in that room know all the answers. Of course I don't. But we have to, you're trying to manage a room with, 150 people. It's impossible. Trying to manage a group of more than 16 is pretty challenging. So that's deliberately why we are positioned as a beta. We want people to look at it, tell us, no, you've missed this. Because it does very much focus on the price element. I mean, you can argue that equity is, I want to be able to publish in Serbo-Croat. Our tool doesn't really address that at all. So if equity in terms of bibliodiversity is the number one thing for you, this tool in its current format doesn't focus on that. It is much more like the pricing elements. That said, we do also try and, we believe that the obsession with the version of record, embedding the sort of article as the only primary artifact that counts is problematic. And that's what's led to APCs, transformative agreements, embed the same thing. It values the article. So the tool does have there's only 7 questions, and 2 of them are about trying to promote open research practices.
Thank you.
We did answer.
Lorraine, do you have to?
Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult when you're doing these projects on limited resources, to talk to as many people as possible. We did interviews with lots and lots of publishers. I can't remember how many now, but tried to get a real spectrum across size and type. We had an open workshop where we invited all stakeholders to come, consortia, librarians, publishers, and then also, of course, coalitionists put together a steering group for us. So, yeah, I mean, we spoke to as many people as we could, but we were limited by resource and time. Yes.
But just on that, the actual need for this study arose from a workshop we had conducted with IFL, OA 2020, the International Science Council, all those sort of people. So it was responding to a particular community need.
Okay.
What about my community? Who attended?
From IFL, Rima.
Oh, IFL.
No, not
IFL.
Rima. It was Irina.
Well, IFL is a collaborator,
Okay.
not my community.
This is can you see that?
Your
Go
community,
on.
I don't think we had anything.
Challenge each other. Go on.
Yeah.
No, just curious because I know it's kind of unfair.
But now I've met you.
Yes.
I'd be
If I can afford, you can afford to come.
All right, you can exchange cards later. Malavika, tell me who was
Okay,
part of that.
so because it was a long process, right? We had 4 workshops that had mostly publishers and librarians from 32 different countries. And then our open consultation as well. So effectively, we've had voices and comments from every habited continent, right, in one sense.
Right.
But I know in the balance, we've had a greater proportion of voices from Europe and from the US. In terms of how we valued it, it was the substance of the words mattered, right? Whoever was sending it in, or whatever their participation in the workshops, it wasn't like then there was a different sifting or anything like that. It was inputs that we got were taken on board. And this is why the process is taking so long, okay? Because there's a lot of comments to work through, and we are really thinking about everything that we hear. And there are clashing comments as well, because the thinking in the global north and the thinking in the global south, if you want to divide the world that way, it can be very different. So we do have clashing comments, and we are looking at what is the best way to blend and get the best for both and learn from each half, right? This is one world under the sun, so I don't like actually demarcating lines.
Yeah. Omo, do you have...
No, there's really not much more to say.
Right. Okay, let's go to...
Vincent, yeah, thank you. Responding to your question about let's not talk about money, let's think about other issues with equity. And so I'm going to provide an example from my own practice. So for a long time, I used to be an editor-in-chief for an open access journal on Nubian studies, and Nubia is a region southern Egypt, northern Sudan. We had an editorial board, both including scholars from Global North and from Global South, I suppose you would call this. So we had Sudanese, Egyptian people on our board, Nubians, and both scholars and what you would call para-academics, because a lot of Nubian scholarship is done by people outside the university. It's a very small field. And we run this open access journal. It's on e-scholarship platform of WACREN. Still, it's a labor of love. So we asked at some point, how, it is open access, but what can we do in order to make this journal more accessible to the actual Nubian people about whom we are producing all this scholarly research? And one of the things that we didn't expect was they talked about bandwidth. So PDFs, in which we usually publish our works digitally, are rather heavy, especially if they are archaeological in nature and there are like tons of images. And so we started thinking about how can we actually make a journal that's as light as possible, so you can download it on an old smartphone and you can read it. The second thing that we really didn't think about was that, yes, these articles are open, but the references are not. So how can we actually make sure that people can, reading is not only reading the article, reading is very often snowballing, right? I don't understand something, I go to the reference. this is not available to people who live in Aswan or who live in Khartoum, right? They're at war. There's literally no infrastructure. So they have intermittent access to internet 5 minutes a day, right? So how can we, tap into the way that they transmit knowledge, which is through USB sticks, basically. That's how things go around. So we started thinking, how can we package the journal, not necessarily for online consumption, but how can we, package everything such that it fits on a USB stick together with all the references, nicely packaged up, readable as a thing that doesn't need the internet. And so these were two things that really struck me, is that we would have never thought about this on our own, but you really need the input of like this diverse set of stakeholders.
Thank you. Let me just introduce something. I did mention that my day job is as a head of communities. From what was just said, it seems that, it requires all of us to take proactive action in wherever we are. There is a lot expected from policies and strategies, but I think individual organizations can make a lot of difference in how they make decisions, in the choices we make. And being proactive in finding people to take part in what we do is difficult. I do this every day. Until today, I can tell you one of our struggle. In the ambassador program, we have people from across the world, but we don't have anyone from the Caribbean, and we don't have anyone from the Pacific Islands. So we've done everything we can. So there are communities that are difficult to reach. We put up applications and everything, but we need to think about what more can we do. No one is hard to reach. This is what I've done all my life. No one is hard to reach. So let's think about it in that way. But I'm going to jump over to the panels and ask them as we get towards the end. How does all this complement each other? What are we learning from them? Would we be back here in 20 years? The keynote on the other day said we've been doing this for 20 years. Would we be here in 20 years with different new frameworks saying the same thing, essentially, but with different names? Robert did talk about how open is it and how equitable is it. What do you think? How do you complement each other? Let's start with Omo.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So listening to Vincent, I'm thinking, well, even let's call it the Global South has a role to play in this. Yes, there are issues, but there has to be more work done on our side. I see that as infrastructure, right? Because there has to be enough infrastructure to participate in the conversation for a start. Because if every time we come, it is about asking for something, then you start to get the waivers, you get the hand-me-downs, you get all of that. So in sort of trying to address the equity issue, I would like to come back here next year telling you about infrastructure we rolled out, options that allow you work with us a little bit more equitably. And then maybe the models, will not be driven solely by money.
Thank you. And that Omo has set an example. I want short answers because we have 5 minutes to go. So who wants to go next? Yes,
Go
please.
next. I will take my lead from you, Chair, and say what's missing, right? So what I learn is that there's so much else, like you were pointing to as well, Vincent. So, there's discipline-based inequities, there's the lack of multilingualism, there's the need for the format thing to be addressed and a diversity of formats, there's the representation point and whose voices are here and not here, and who is a stakeholder with influence. So it's a vast topic, right? We're barely scratching the surface at the moment, and that's my takeaway, that there is much more to be done on these many fronts.
Thank you. Lorraine?
Well, I think the 20 years question is quite an interesting one. And what we will face in 20 years actually depends an awful lot on what happens on the climate crisis. So we had a brilliant speaker this morning talking about a really essential project. So I think if publishers contribute to that and researchers are able to work on the climate crisis, maybe we will have made some progress. But if we don't make progress on the climate crisis, we will get more inequity and more inequality in our globe.
Thank you. And Robert?
Are we going to be here in 20 years' time? Well, I won't be.
You will be, of course.
I don't think when I'm in my 80s I'll be able to navigate the streets of Lisbon. But I do think you know, if we go back 20 years, we thought we had the answer with APCs, and they did one thing. They demonstrated that open access was possible, because when it first started, it was like this will never work, and we demonstrated it was possible. It has come at a huge cost, and we now recognise clearly the inequities of that approach. So I hope we aren't here in 20 years discussing inequalities. I hope we are discussing the fact everything is open and we have solved the climate crisis and other problems similar to that. So I'm optimistic for the future.
Thank you. I am too, and we should all be. Does anyone has any contribution, any question? I think I saw a hand in the midriff over there. Yes, earlier. You have 59 seconds to say what you want to say.
You have 10 minutes.
What? Oh, what is this thing saying?
That's correct.
Ignore it. We got time. Let's have a chat. Well, you got 62 seconds now.
Thank you. I'm Beth from Carger Publishers. I have a mild allergy to public speaking, but sorry to go back to another money and cost question, but it's kind of, I've thought about this a lot, and it distresses me about waivers, that we hear that, you know, they feel like begging and they're demeaning. I think, you know, for the near term, like you talk about workarounds, they're not ideal, but I think they'll be around for a bit, and I wonder, you know, how we can improve that, how we can make it not feel that way. I know we, at Carger, we give them like automatically, and we are cognizant of, you know, trying to not make them feel that way.
Yeah.
But it is something I hear a lot. And waivers are, like I heard a funder some years back say, like, at that point, when you talk about, you know, our understanding and, you know, trial and error, you know, has evolved, but they said, like, you know, the solution to equity in APCs will be for publishers to give waivers. And that does have an impact on us. I mean, open access was, you know, I'd say it is like disruptive for publishing. And so we're always doing something, like not earning money on something that costs us money. It has an impact on us as well. But yeah, I think about, you know, how can we change that and make that better? Because they're here for a bit longer, I think, at least.
Thank you. Does anyone have an... okay.
Thanks, Beth. Thank you for the question. There's some details under our goal 3, which if you come and see me at the poster in the break, I can talk through the nitty-gritty, because I don't want to... listening to the chair, the boss here, who said, we will leave the nitty-gritties, we will keep it high level. So I'm happy to talk some specifics. I will also say to you, there's a great article, I think it's a 2023 article, and Lorraine, I think it's in the UKSG journal, if I'm not wrong. It's called...
It's a very good journal.
Yeah, it's called Missing a Golden Opportunity. And it's a study on waivers and actually the fact that even though they exist and even where, you know, there are many publishers, like I said earlier, some are streets ahead, some are automating loads of things, people are not asking for charity, you know, these are all good things. They are still not making, the data in that paper shows us that much of a difference certainly in some regions. It's a great paper that speaks to that question. And if you come speak to me, I'll find the proper reference. But thank you for the question, because, you know, they are around. And that's why we have that goal around reducing barriers and burdens.
Yeah. Does anyone...
Yeah, I declare an interest here. I worked with I4 for 18 months, helping them with their licensing activities. And a lot of that was working with publishers, both in terms of making content available to the I4 members, but also the ability to publish, usually at no cost. So I think that, I mean, of course, I4 covers just 33 countries, but I would really encourage publishers to work with I4 if they want to introduce waivers in those countries, because it's a bit different, because they're negotiated, because there's an agreement. and also because I feel promotes the fact that those opportunities are there. So yeah, that would be my recommendation, actually.
I'll just say, I mean, obviously researchers do not want to be seen as charitable cases begging publishers to, waive their fee. Again, in the tool, that's probably a good example, a practical example where a publisher which applied automatic waivers based on, I don't know, the IP address or the email address, whatever, would score more highly than a publisher who said, well, you've got to, prove you've got financial hardship. So that's just a practical example. But I don't think waivers are a long-term sustainable solution.
Yeah. Just don't use email addresses. I beg your pardon, don't use the IP address.
Don't use
because
email.
half the internet comes through pathways that would say the person lives in England when he's actually living in somewhere in Africa, depending on where the connection comes from.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Oh, there's a. Oh, right.
Can I? There's one. Can I? We need to finish now.
Oh, I thought you said we have 10 minutes.
No, I lied.
Oh, right.
Bad timekeeper.
That's fine.
Transition time. But Mariana, yeah, has a comment. So I'm gonna
keep it
Yes.
snappy.
Very fast. I'm going back to Heather's point.
Right.
A voice that is missing is you focus a lot on researchers. Librarians, we also work with teachers, and they are not always the same population. So we have the researchers that are teachers, some teachers that are researchers, but it's a Venn diagram. And teachers are consumers of the information that the publishers do, and we are pushing them. They said, oh, they care about textbooks. Not necessarily. We are talking to our teachers to use more and more open access resources. So they let go of those textbooks, and they are actually using articles. So perhaps teachers also is a voice that might be missing here, and you need to think about them.
Thank you. Amanda, you and I will talk about the questions, and you buy me coffee. So let me finish by saying that I think building equity into open access requires a lot of steps, but I want to leave you with some words that you might consider to be negative. I think if you can keep thinking about these words, it starts with exclusion, inequity, barriers, feedback, participation, and representation. These are the things I want you to keep thinking about because it would help us to start becoming, once you start thinking inequity, hopefully you want to be solving it. And that's what I took from OASPA's work. Think about these things. Exclusion, who is excluded? And the policy makers. Now, I think one of the problems is that the policies and models are set up in Western countries and then imposed on the other parts of the world, which make it very difficult to implement. On this panel, I wish we had a voice from Asia, from Latin America, because this is about a global issue, not a one-sided issue, but there was a reason we are the way we are set up. So please do take it personal and go out there to work and make more equity in what we do so that open access would really become open access. I don't believe it's open anyway. And as the last person said, if it's not open, then some parts of the society are going to be missing out from it. So thank you for being here, and thank you for participating, for making it work out. I wasn't sure it was going to, but it did. Now, we have coffee. It's free. Amanda's not paying for it. She would have run away. Ooh. But
very equitable.
We must say thank you to Bloomsbury, who has kindly provided this coffee. It's upstairs at the mezzanine, the usual place. Please go there, have some coffee. And this is serious. This is very, very serious. I was told that this is serious. You must be back here by 11:44. How about that? So thank you, everyone. And please thank my panel.